This is a question taken from the GCSE OCR history exam paper. What is the message of this cartoon? And you can see that it's actually published from the British magazine Punch in February 1919. And this time frame here, 1919, is really important for understanding the overall message. You can see here that we have a historical cartoon. We have some kind of police figures there arresting some kind of criminal, and if we look a little bit further at the writing, I've actually put the details here so that we can actually read it a little bit better, and we can see that it says "Give him rope." That's the title of the cartoon, and the German criminal to the Allied police. So this criminal is actually a German one, and these people here are the Allied policemen, so it's the British and the French policemen. And the criminal's saying, "Here I say, stop, you're hurting me." So he's complaining to the policeman because he's being tied up too strongly. And aside he says to himself, so he's saying this so that the police can't hear him, "If I only whine enough, I may be able to wriggle out of this yet." So the time frame of this, it's all about the Treaty of Versailles, and it's all about how Germany here is complaining to the Allied countries that the treaty is too harsh. And we're going to look at the overall meaning of this throughout the video. So when we look at the overall mark scheme for the question, we can see that for 1 or 2 marks out of 6, you're simply answering the question and you're not backing it up with any source details or contextual knowledge. And that takes us on to 3 or 4. You'll need to take into consideration some, perhaps 2, maybe 3 of the key aspects from the source in order to back up your point. And then of course, to take it even further to get the full marks, for 5 and 6 out of 6 you need to include the contextual knowledge, meaning what was going on at the time. And of course it's this time frame here, 1919, that you'll need to include within your answer. So let's have a closer look at the contextual knowledge, or what was going on at the time of when this cartoon was published. And by November 1918, 4 years of total war had absolutely devastated an area the size of Wales in France, and parts of Belgium also. Millions of men from both Allied countries and the Central Powers had been killed, not to mention the millions of civilians that were also affected. And on the 11th of November 1918, Germany surrendered, and what was known as the Armistice was signed. And this signalled that the fighting was indeed over, and that Germany acknowledged that it had been defeated. Now this was a big shock to the German people, because the war propaganda at the time signalled that Germany was actually winning and was doing really well in the war. So this came as a massive shock to the German people. And so consequently, when what was known as the Big Three met in the Palace of Versailles to decide what would happen to Germany, the German people were shocked at how harsh the treaty would actually end up being. So of course we have George Clemenceau, the leader of France, who was pushing for an incredibly tough treaty. They had been attacked twice now by Germany in the last 100 years. They wanted to make sure that Germany could never defeat them again. We have Lloyd George, who wanted to make sure that Germany was punished because the British public was putting pressure on him to make sure that the country was punished. But he also wanted a country that could be a strong trading partner. So he didn't want to crush the country. And then we have Woodrow Wilson. He wanted a much softer and lenient treaty. He actually wanted to help to rebuild Germany. And when it became clear that the treaty was indeed going to be harsh, the Germans began to complain about how harsh the treaty was going to be. Now, the people in Britain and France, particularly the media and the public, began to criticise the Germans and tell them to stop complaining. They felt that it was the Germans that were to blame for starting the war, and that they were the ones to blame for the billions that had been spent, for the land that had been devastated, and the people that had been killed. So now over to you. You will need to press pause in a moment, and you will need to consider what the message of this cartoon is. You must always consider the time frame of when the cartoon was published, and always consider the writing here, because this is absolutely essential for understanding the overall message. Now you'll need to consider who these people are, what is their jobs and which countries are they from. It's clear that this is a criminal. Make references to facial expressions and things like that and body posture. Look at all the different details involved, because this is key to understanding the meaning of the cartoon. So now over to you. Press pause and then we'll look at what the key messages are. So let's have a closer look at some of the symbols contained within this cartoon, and that will help us to understand the overall message. I think these areas here in the background and the damage here could be something to remind the audience that what's been going on here is the fighting of World War I and the devastation behind it. And I think central to this is the fact that because it is a British magazine, that Germany is actually to blame for all of this, and that the audience shouldn't forget that. Here we have a stereotypical looking policeman. So we have at the top, we've got there a French policeman and a British policeman. And it's essential for us to remember that policemen are there to protect the public. They are doing a job there designed to make sure that criminals don't do us any harm. And that's the symbology behind this here. The policemen representing Britain and France are being harsh with Germany here, represented by this criminal there, designed in order to protect us. So when the German criminal is complaining by stating here at the bottom, here I say, stop, you're hurting me, and then aside, meaning to himself, if I only whine enough I may be able to wriggle out of this, is saying that Germany is only complaining because they are trying to get out of the punishment. Now this is really important because that is the overall message of the cartoon. Now if you look a little bit deeper, you can see that it says that the rope that he's complaining about is the armistice terms, meaning the peace treaty terms. So the overall message of this is highlighting that it is the British and the French that are acting like policemen, that they are arresting a criminal-like country in order to stop it from doing any more damage ever again, the damage being highlighted there, and that the German is actually complaining even though that he is the one to blame. So let's go back to the mark scheme. You will need to directly answer the question in your opening sentences, and this is a really useful technique to do. Then you will need to back up your answer with source details. So we've been looking at, for example, how the criminal is shown as being Germany, and you can see from the facial expressions that he looks like a sneaky character, and the armistice terms are highlighted here by the rope that they're complaining about. The policeman here, we have stereotypical French policeman and a British policeman, and don't forget that policemen are designed to protect innocent people. Now going back to the mark scheme, to get full marks, the 5 and 6 out of 6, you need to consider this time frame. Now 1919 is the time when the Treaty of Versailles was being negotiated, and it's the Germans who are complaining that they feel as though the treaty is going to be too harsh. But the British public and the French public, they were the ones who were saying that Germany should be treated severely. And as a result of that, they put pressure on their leaders to make sure that Germany was punished accordingly.